Welcome to Healthy Living. I'm Lori Johnson. Thanks for joining us. Our topic today is the very heavy but very real subject of suicide. My guest is Catherine Renfro, author of the book Hope, Hurt, and Healing: Experiencing Jesus in the Wake of Suicide. Catherine, thank you so much for being with us today and for writing this book. I'm sure it's going to help so many people. We appreciate your time.
Well, Lori, thank you so much for having me on. I'm so grateful, and just pray that the Lord uses this in a way that only He can.
Tens of thousands of people are affected by suicide every single year. You were one of those people in the wake of your brother's suicide. Can you tell us a little bit about your story and his story and why you wrote the book?
Sure. You're right. It affects so many people today. And I didn't know this at the time when I started walking this journey after losing my brother to suicide. But we're not far from someone who has either experienced a loss to suicide or knows someone who has experienced loss to it. Research shows every 40 seconds right now, someone is taking their life. And that was our story. My brother, you would have never guessed that this would be something that he would do. We grew up and had a ton of fun as a family together. But, for whatever reason, he just struggled. And I'll never forget the night of October 5th, 2008. I got a phone call at 2:22 in the morning, and those phone calls never tend to be good. And I remember answering it and just hearing my brother really just screaming and crying in panic on the other end of the line, just saying, "I can't keep doing this." And I didn't know what he meant. And I think the enemy was just getting the best of his mind and making him feel like he was just caught in a cycle that he would never get out of. He had struggled a little bit with drugs and alcohol and had turned back to those things that night. And just the shame and the guilt that he felt, he just thought there was no other option, that his best option was to end his life, and he did. And our family just was left in shock, just grief beyond what you can imagine. And that was just the beginning of a long journey. I wrote this book, not because I wanted to, but the Lord just prompted me over and over again to write, because there's so many people who are walking this journey and they feel so helpless and hopeless in the midst of it. And He's so faithful to show how He shows up in the details of grief and along the journey, and that we don't have to do it alone. And so my prayer as people read this book is they don't remember our story, but that they will see how God shows up in their story. And so that's why we wrote this book.
It's actually hundreds of thousands of people are affected by suicide every year. And you're so right. Just all of us have been touched by it. I know myself personally, I've been touched by suicide more than once. And just recently, I became very close friends with somebody whose wife committed suicide. She had a 1 and a 3-year-old daughter and was a strong believer. They were very, very strong believers. But she had struggled with mental health issues for many years, had attempted suicide before. You said that your brother, did you know he had any mental health problems?
I did not. There was one point in his life when I was in college where he had called me in the middle of the night again, very similar timing. But he was intoxicated while he called me at that point. And it was the first time that he ever said that he was going to take his life. And we were able to talk. We talked quite a while that night. And he ended up going to bed, sobering up, and then had never showed any signs, had never talked about it since then. It was never even just a thought. So that one time he mentioned it, but that was it, and sometimes, people turn to this idea over and over, and then sometimes it just seems to happen, out of the blue. You would never expect it,
We see it so much in the church, people who struggle with thoughts of suicide over and over again. And it's so awful. When he called you that morning at 2:22, did he say he was going to take his own life?
He did. We talked for a while, and he told me everything that happened that night. He had gone to a bar, gotten into an argument, turned to alcohol again, and just felt like, man, I can't keep doing this. And he said, I'm going to take my life. I was in seminary at the time, and just the graciousness of the Lord, rather than being 4 hours away, I was only 30 minutes away from him because I was home for fall break. And so I said, hey, we're going to come over to your house. Just hang on. And he told me, hey, don't come. You'll find me dead. He told me he had already downed a bottle of pills and
Oh,
he was going to take his life. And so, I tried everything I could to keep him on the line and to talk to him, and it just wasn't enough.
I'm so, so sorry. You really basically wrote this book for survivors. And what is the number one emotion? What is the number one thing that survivors deal with? Is it guilt? Is it shame? What is it?
It's hard to say what the number one factor is, but I think there's so many questions that's put in our mind along the lines of guilt of how could I have prevented this? How could I have stopped them? And really, how do I even move forward now? So honestly, it's such a roller coaster of emotions, from guilt to confusion to frustration to anger to hurt to deep grief, and what I've seen is there's no manual to walk through all of that. It's so interesting because one moment you can feel sadness, and then the next moment feel anger, and then the next moment be questioning, how could I have stopped this? And so I feel like it just ebbs and flows from one emotion to another, which is why I'm so grateful for the things that the Lord taught me over the course of years. By the way, this was not like a one night we just figured it all out. I mean, we are years into this journey, and it still hurts, and we're still learning. But He's just showed me His faithfulness in the midst of all the emotions. And when our emotions change, the Lord does not change. He's constant, and He's steady, and He's present through it all. And I'm so thankful for that.
When you talk about feelings of anger, who are those feelings of anger directed towards?
Hmm. I'll be honest. I was really angry towards my brother for a while, not understanding how he could make the decision that he made, and how he couldn't think about what it would do to our family. So I was really frustrated with him for a while, and sometimes I still get frustrated when I think about it. Because I wish that weren't the case, but I also understand that this, mental health struggles is a very real thing, and it's not something that you can just turn on and off like a light switch, But it's a real struggle that impacts people very deeply.
Well, we're going to take a break right now and be right back with Catherine Renfro. The book is called Hope, Hurt, and Healing, Experiencing Jesus in the Wake of Suicide. When we come back, we're going to talk about just exactly how Jesus met her in her grief, and how He can meet us, and how we can minister to others who are going through this type of grief. Stay with us. Welcome back to Healthy Living. We are talking about suicide today, and with Catherine Renfro, author of the book Hope, Hurt, and Healing, Experiencing Jesus in the Wake of Suicide. Catherine, you talked right before the break about being angry and not understanding how anyone could do this. And I think most of us feel that way too. We look at people who take their own lives and say, how could they do this? In some circumstances, we say they had so much. How could they do that to the people they left behind? And how could they not see how much they had and the blessings? What is going through the mind of a person who is contemplating and ultimately does commit suicide?
I think honestly, every situation and story is different. In my brother's case, like I said, he had downed a bottle of pills before taking his life. And I know he was not in his right mind even when we were talking on the phone. I'm not even sure that he was aware of the entire conversation and what was happening. For him, though, what I heard from him was shame, and I heard guilt in his voice. When he said, I can't keep doing this, I can't keep doing this over and over. I asked him what he meant by that, and he thought that he just kept hurting us by decisions that he had made in his life and that he had again made that night. And so just the feelings of shame and guilt and feeling like he was in this cycle that he would never get out of when it comes to turning to other substances when things got hard. And so, for him specifically, that's all I can speak to. But I do know there's a wide variety of emotions and things that are going through people's minds when they think, their only escape is to end it all.
I've heard psychiatrists say they just want to get out of the pain. They just want relief from the pain. And some of us have experienced that with physical pain, where the physical pain is so bad and so unrelenting that we just want the suffering to stop and wish to die. And some people are saying it's the same thing with some very severe mental health problems. It just hurts so bad they want the suffering to stop. You mentioned anger. Talk about feelings of guilt. Surely people who are family members must be dealing with a lot of guilt. And if you're a Christian, maybe that's a little bit hard to talk about, because in the church, there's this idea that we're all supposed to be doing really well with our mental health.
Yeah. There's the guilt on the side of family who's left behind. Because I think there's a lot of questions that come our way. Were there signs of this before it happened? Did I miss those signs? How could I have prevented this? What could I have done differently? What could I have said? All of those questions went through my mind for so long after losing my brother. And I think even about what David says in the Bible in Psalm 38:4. He says, my guilt has overwhelmed me like a burden too heavy to bear. I feel like that's what the guilt, like the sentiment of guilt and pain that people who are struggling with this feel. But I also think for family members, we feel this same weight, this same burden over the situation and the circumstances. And I think the enemy wants to keep us there. I think the enemy, Satan, wants us to feel guilt. He wants us to question. And I think in this, we have a decision to make. Like, I think that's where we have to either run to the truths of God's word and lean into who he is, and what his word says, and find freedom in him, or we run away from him and the enemy just keeps us in this spiraling situation. But I think there's a time where we just have to come to the understanding that we, as family members who are left behind, we're not in control, and we couldn't control. I could not control my brother's decision. I couldn't control him. And while I wish things were different, hear me say that, I wish things were different. I'm just thankful for the hope that I found in Jesus along the way. The one who shows like, hey, you don't have to live in guilt. You don't have to live in shame and regret. And I'm just grateful for how he showed up in the details along that journey of processing that.
We're going to take a quick break and be right back with Catherine Renfro. And when we come back, we're going to talk about exactly how she experienced Jesus in the wake of suicide. So stay with us on Healthy Living. Welcome back to Healthy Living. We are continuing our discussion with Catherine Renfro, author of the book Hope, Hurt, and Healing: Experiencing Jesus in the Wake of Suicide. So, Catherine, how did you experience Jesus in the wake of your brother's suicide?
Yeah, he was so faithful just to show up. I'll give you a couple of specific examples there. After the funeral for my brother, a couple of days later, I drove 4 hours back to where I was attending seminary. And there were so many days where I just wanted to quit. I wanted to move back home, to be closer to family. At that point, I was 9 years into my relationship with Jesus, and I honestly just had moments where I questioned, like, God, where are you? Who are you? Like, why is this happening And I remember journaling through this whole process, just journaling things that I was thinking, things that I was feeling. I would write out my prayers. And I found as I was writing this book, Hope, Hurt, and Healing, Experiencing Jesus in the Wake of Suicide, I found the journal that I had written in. And there was a night where I was just writing and expressing just everything that I was feeling and just questioning God and doubting Him. And then the very next morning, I had picked up the journal again, and the Lord had led me to Psalm 139 when I felt like He was so distant and I couldn't figure out why things were happening or where He was in the midst of it. Psalm 139 says this: "Where shall I go from your spirit? Or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to the heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me and your right hand shall hold me fast." And He just used His word to remind me of His presence, even in the hardest times. Like He's still there. He's not left us. And I'm grateful for that reminder in the moment where I needed it most. There was another day I was walking out of class, and I just was struggling. In fact, it was my first class back after burying my brother, and someone in our counseling class at the time asked a question that I couldn't figure out what he meant or why he had asked it. He said, "Hey, why do we tell family members who have lost someone to suicide that their family members in heaven if we know that's not true?" And that, oh, I can't tell you how that question impacted me, because I knew that my brother was in fact in heaven, and I was confident of his relationship with Jesus. He wasn't in heaven because of anything he had done or not done here on earth, but in heaven because of what Jesus had done
Yes.
for him. And so I left that class. I don't even know how the professor responded, but I was hurting so deeply. And in that very moment that I walked out of the class, I got a phone call from a friend, and I answered it. And my friend said, "Hey, the Lord just put you on my heart, and I wanted to call and see how you're doing today."
Oh,
And it was like the Lord just divinely orchestrated people to come alongside me, whether it was through a phone call, a text message, showing up at my door at just the right moments to say, "Hey, you're not on this journey alone. Like, I see you, and I'm going to provide for you every step of the way." And sometimes He did that through His word. Sometimes He did that through other people. He did that through a lot of things. And I think about, what the Bible tells us in Galatians. It says, "Carry one another's burdens, and in doing so, you fulfill the law of Christ." He put people just alongside of me, really just to pick up the burdens when I was feeling like it was too heavy. And I'm so thankful for just those little moments that turned out to be really big moments along the journey.
indeed. Well, we're going to take one final break and be right back with Catherine Renfro and drill down a little bit deeper about what people can do to minister to people who are dealing with the suicide of a loved one. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're talking to Catherine Renfro, author of Hope, Hurt, and Healing, Experiencing Jesus in the Wake of Suicide. And before the break, you talked about what a blessing it is to have some people touch your life and just what seems to them like a small thing, but for you it was a huge thing. How can those of us who know people who have had suicide in their family, how can we help them, Catherine?
That's a really great question, Lori. And if I could boil this down to just a few easy, practical things, I would say this. One of the best things that you can do is just show up. What I've seen in my own life, and I've seen in the lives of others who have walked this journey, is the ministry of presence is one of the greatest ministries. So just showing up. I think acknowledging unanswered questions is so helpful, because there are so many questions that are asked, that we feel after losing someone to suicide. And the truth is, we will never have all of the answers on this side of eternity. And so it's okay to acknowledge that, but also point people to Jesus, even in those questions. Jeremiah 33:3 says, "Call to me and I will answer you." We serve a God who loves us, who hears us when we cry out to him and who is faithful to respond. And so acknowledge questions and point people to Jesus. And then I would say affirm those stages of grief. We talked about this a few moments ago, but it's such a roller coaster through the stages of grief. And when our emotions change day by day, sometimes minute by minute, what we know to be truth is that Jesus does not change. And sometimes we just need to affirm those different emotions, but the unwavering grace of the Lord. Hebrews 13:8 says Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so in the midst of changing emotions, we can be confident in who he is. And so affirming that, but also pointing to the truth, which is that fourth thing. It's just pointing to Jesus. Grief by suicide feels so dark, and it feels very lonely and isolating. And we have an enemy that wants to discourage us even more in those moments and distract us. He has come to still kill and destroy. But in Jesus, we know that there is life and hope. And so I would say point people to Jesus. Those are all very practical things that anybody can do as you come along someone who's dealing with loss by suicide.
That's great advice. Unfortunately, Catherine, we're out of time. I wish we had more time to talk about this. Tell our viewers where they can find the book and find out more about you.
Absolutely. So you can go to Amazon to order the book, Hope, Hurt, and Healing, Experiencing Jesus in the Wake of Suicide. You can also get it on Lifeway's website at lifeway.com. And then to find out more about me, you can visit CatherineRenfro.com. So any of those places is a great place to go.
Right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And of course, for your incredible work in writing this book. We appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me on.
And thanks to you for joining us for this edition of Healthy Living. I'm Lori Johnson, and we'll see you again next week.